There's an ancient truth that every religion fears. A truth older than Scripture, older than gods, older than every story humanity has ever told itself. A truth so simple, so obvious, so undeniable, that once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it has destroyed more faith than any argument, any debate, any atheist book ever could. Because this truth doesn't attack religion. It exposes it. And when you finally understand what ancient people actually believed, before religion became polished, edited, and sanitized, you realize something uncomfortable. We didn't inherit divine wisdom. We inherited human imagination. And the moment you grasp that, faith begins to fall apart. The oldest lie we still believe. Here's the strange part. For thousands of years, humans assumed that everything they couldn't explain had a mind behind it. Not a force or a natural process, but a thinking, emotional presence. Thunder meant someone was angry. Disease meant someone was punishing. Rain meant someone was rewarding. A rustle in the dark meant someone was watching. This wasn't foolishness, it was survival. In the ancient world, assuming intention kept people alive. If the bushes moved, it was safer to imagine a predator than a breeze. If the sky cracked open, it felt logical to believe a powerful being was expressing rage. If the harvest failed, it felt comforting to believe that someone in the unseen world was in control, even if that someone was displeased. This instinct, the reflex to imagine minds everywhere, is the oldest psychological habit humans have. Modern scientists call it agency detection. Long before religion became an institution, long before temples and scripture, this instinct shaped how people interpreted reality. It was fear wearing a mask of meaning. And once you believe the universe has a mind, the next steps happen automatically. You begin giving that mind a personality, then a name, then stories, then rules. Thunder becomes a god, rain becomes a blessing, sickness becomes a curse, the randomness of nature becomes a moral scoreboard. Here's the detail religion rarely acknowledges. Every tribe on Earth created its own invisible beings. Every culture created its own cosmic personalities. Every priest claimed to understand what those personalities wanted. They weren't discovering eternal truth. They were all responding to the same human instinct, the same ancient fear, the same urge to fill the unknown with imagined intention. And once you understand that this is how belief began, something shifts. You start realizing that gods appear everywhere except in reality. You start seeing patterns not as revelations, but as projections. You begin to notice that faith did not begin with divine messages. It began with the human struggle to feel safe in a world filled with danger and uncertainty. And that realization leads to a darker question. If belief begins in fear, what happens when the fear fades? The ancient trick that still works today. Early priests discovered something powerful, something that would shape human belief for thousands of years. They realized that whoever controls the story controls the people who believe it. They understood that the human mind is not guided by truth alone, but by the need to feel safe. And safety often comes not from facts, but from certainty. So they offered exactly that. They claimed to speak for the unseen. They claimed to know what no ordinary person could know. They claimed access to hidden realms, secret wisdom, divine judgment, and the rules that governed both this life and whatever might come after it. And for people living in a world filled with danger, hunger, disease, and mystery, those claims were irresistible. Because uncertainty is painful. Not knowing why your crops failed is frightening. Not knowing why children die or storms strike or disasters happen creates a sense of chaos that the human mind struggles to handle. So when someone appears and offers answers, even answers built on imagination rather than evidence, those answers feel like relief. Certainty, even when false, feels safer than the truth that nobody actually knows. This was the ancient trick. It did not require miracles. It did not require proof. All it required was confidence and a compelling story. Tell people why suffering happens. Tell them who is watching them. Tell them what they must do to stay safe. Tell them what to fear. Tell them what to hope for. Once a story explains everything, people stop questioning anything. And here is the part that still works today. When someone claims absolute certainty about the meaning of life, the origin of the universe, morality, salvation, or destiny, the human mind relaxes. The tension disappears, doubt fades, and obedience follows. This psychological craving is so old that we barely notice it working on us. But once you recognize that certainty itself is a tool, a lever used to guide behavior and shape belief, something fundamental changes. The authority behind the story starts to crumble, the magic dissolves, and the next truth becomes impossible to avoid. Every god is a reflection, not a revelation. Think about this for a moment. When you look at the gods of ancient civilizations, something striking appears. Their emotions are not divine at all. They have human jealousy, human anger, human pride, human insecurity. They show favoritism. They hold grudges. They reward loyalty and punish disobedience. They act less like cosmic beings and more like exaggerated versions of the people who invented them. In myth after myth, gods throw tantrums when they are ignored. They demand sacrifice when they feel disrespected. They fight among themselves. They compete for attention. They behave exactly like tribal leaders, like kings, like parents trying to control their children. In other words, these gods were not discovered. They were projected. They were created from familiar emotions, familiar power structures, and familiar fears, then scaled up to the size of the sky. This is the part that religion never wants you to notice. If a god is supposed to be perfect, why does it behave like the most flawed human you know? Why does an all-powerful being care about flattery? Why would a creator of galaxies need offerings, rituals, praise, or obedience? Why would a timeless force be offended by clothing, language, food, or sexuality? These aren't the concerns of a cosmic intelligence. They are the concerns of human societies, human leaders, and human moral anxieties. Once you see this pattern, it becomes impossible to unsee it. You begin to understand that gods mirror the culture that shapes them. Harsh environments create harsh gods. Patriarchal societies create patriarchal gods. Fearful people create fearful deities. Compassionate communities create compassionate ones. Every divine personality is a reflection of the people who believed in it, not a revelation from another realm. And after noticing this, something unsettling happens deep inside you. You stop seeing religion as a message sent from above. You stop seeing scripture as a supernatural transcript. Instead, you start seeing it as an autobiography of the human mind, a record of our hopes, fears, desires, and flaws. It becomes clear that when humans created gods, they were really trying to understand themselves. The moment humans became self-aware, and faith became fragile. Here's the twist nobody talks about. The moment humans began studying their own minds, religion started losing its magic. For most of history, every strange feeling, every vision, every dream, every wave of fear was interpreted as a message from the divine. People didn't know how memory worked, how trauma reshaped the brain, how the mind protects itself, or why sleep can pull us into vivid, terrifying states. So every mystery was labeled spiritual. But once psychology emerged, everything changed. Fear began to have explanations rooted in biology rather than in spirits. Guilt no longer felt like a cosmic warning, but a social instinct shaped by evolution. Mystical experiences, once treated as sacred encounters, began to resemble natural brain activity. Hallucinations, which were once considered the voice of gods, became symptoms of stress, deprivation, or illness. Sleep paralysis, which for centuries was blamed on demons, was finally understood as a temporary disconnect between the body and the mind. Even the intense feeling of being watched, once attributed to guardian angels or lurking spirits, turned out to be a survival mechanism developed by our ancestors. The ancient truth becomes impossible to ignore. Every miracle is simply a misunderstanding that humanity has not yet explained. As our explanations grow, faith inevitably shrinks. Not because people lose their sense of wonder, but because wonder no longer requires supernatural stories to feel powerful. This is the quiet revolution science created. It did not disprove gods, it made them unnecessary. And the more we uncover about how consciousness works, how emotions are shaped, and how easily the brain can trick itself, the harder it becomes to believe that supernatural forces were responsible for experiences that now have clear psychological origins. Yet, even this is not the deepest revelation. Something even more unsettling waits underneath. The oldest story on Earth isn't about gods. Across every culture on Earth, from Siberia to South America, ancient myths repeat the same narrative patterns. A hero rises from humble beginnings. A god dies and dramatically returns. A virgin conceives a special child. A great flood wipes out corrupt humanity. A prophet receives wisdom from the sky after a long journey or period of suffering. These stories appear in civilizations that never met, never traded, never spoke the same language, and never shared a common religion. Yet the themes are almost identical. How is that possible? Did divine beings coordinate their storytelling across thousands of miles? Did gods synchronize their messages so perfectly that every culture accidentally repeated the same ideas? Or is something else happening, something far more human and far more revealing? The truth is simpler and more unsettling. People everywhere face the same fears, the same dangers, and the same longing for meaning. They fear death, so they imagine resurrection. They fear chaos, so they imagine floods and new beginnings. They fear loneliness, so they imagine chosen heroes. They fear uncertainty, so they imagine prophets with answers. Human minds create patterns even where none exist, because patterns make the world feel safer. And when people feel safer, they feel in control. Religion was not created by gods whispering through the clouds. It was created by pattern-seeking brains, trying to make sense of storms, disease, suffering, and the unpredictability of nature. The stories that survived through generations were not the ones that were true, but the ones that felt emotionally satisfying. They answered the fears that humans everywhere shared. Once you understand this, a deeper truth becomes clear. Religions do not reveal reality, they reveal humanity. They reveal our imagination, our anxieties, our desires, and the universal need to believe that life has structure and purpose, even when the universe stays silent. The ancient truth that shatters religious authority. Here it is, the truth every religion quietly fears. Throughout history, no god has ever revealed anything that humans could not have invented on their own. Every idea presented as divine insight already existed in human cultures long before scripture was written. Moral codes appeared naturally in cooperative societies because kindness and fairness helped groups survive. Creation stories existed in dozens of civilizations, each different, each symbolic, each shaped by geography and imagination rather than by revelation. Rituals were simply the formalization of habits that made people feel connected. Laws grew from practical needs, not divine mandates. Prophecies mirrored political hopes, tribal tensions, and personal anxieties, not supernatural foresight. When you strip away the sacred labels, something becomes impossible to ignore. Everything religion claims as holy already existed in human behavior. Compassion, loyalty, justice, storytelling, fear, and curiosity were all part of humanity long before organized faith appeared. Ancient people gave these natural traits a supernatural origin because it made them feel important and permanent. But the ideas themselves were entirely human. And often, the earlier, pre-religious versions were more flexible, kinder, and better suited to real life than the rigid doctrines that came later. This is the uncomfortable truth. Humans created gods in their own image, giving them human emotions and human priorities, and then forgot they were holding the paintbrush the entire time. We built divine authority out of our own imagination and then surrendered our freedom to the very stories we invented. Once you see this, a deeper question emerges, one that shakes the foundation of belief itself. If humans created gods, then who created the rules? Who decided which behaviors are moral and which are sinful? And why do those rules always seem to benefit the people who enforce them? The final disconnect. Here is where everything begins to unravel. If an all-powerful and all-loving deity truly existed, its message would not splinter into thousands of competing versions. You would not have one culture claiming a god who demands silence and veils, while another claims a god who demands dance and drums. You would not have moral systems changing from century to century as societies evolve. You would not see rules that conveniently shift with politics or align with the interests of those in power. And you certainly would not see sacred stories that look almost identical to myths written centuries earlier by completely different civilizations. If a perfect being were guiding humanity, morality would not mirror human prejudice. There would be no holy approval of slavery, or genocide, or gender inequality, or ritual violence. You would not find sacred texts supporting both peace and war depending on who is reading them. The message would be clear, consistent, and impossible to distort. Yet, the opposite is true. Every religion contradicts the others. Many contradict themselves. And believers inherit their truth through childhood conditioning long before they have the ability to question it. A real God would not look this human. A real God would not share the political concerns of ancient tribes. A real God would not enforce purity rules that match the customs of a single region. A real God would not resemble the emotional landscape of the people who wrote about it, but every God does. This is the ancient truth hiding in plain sight. Religion is not divine. It is inherited mythology, passed down through generations like family stories. Sometimes beautiful, sometimes poetic, sometimes comforting, but entirely human at its core. Once you see that, the final disconnect becomes impossible to ignore. The divine voice people think they hear is really an echo of their own history, their own culture, and their own imagination. When you finally see religion for what it is, a story written by fearful, imaginative, tribal humans, something shifts. You don't become bitter. You don't become empty. You don't lose meaning. You gain clarity. You realize you don't need divine permission to live morally. You don't need ancient rules to be kind. You don't need sacred threats to care about others. You realize that meaning was never handed down from above. It was built from within. And when you let go of myths pretending to be truth, you don't fall into darkness. You step into honesty. So if this video opened something in you, if it made you question, reflect, or breathe a little freer, subscribe, stay curious, and never stop questioning the stories you were told to fear.